exercises to help speed the recovery process. We all deal with injury throughout the season, and we all want to get our kids back on track as soon as possible. So he's going to help us get some smart ways, some tools in the weight room that can help speed that process up. So Brian, thanks again and glad to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So there's a couple aspects that we're going to cover today that hopefully will alter your perspective on everything that you're already doing. Those exercises that I'm going to be going over, those aren't the miracle cure for everything that ails an athlete in a performance environment like track, but it should demonstrate how we need to start approaching today's athlete. Because the number one problem that we're facing in terms of injury prevention and performance training isn't the drills. It's not the techniques. It's not the cool piece of equipment. It's the machine that's walking in the door. It's the kid you're working with. It's the college athlete that you're working with. The machine's broken before you start. The lack of movement dynamically for kids today is, unparalleled, especially, in the U.S. and industrialized cultures. So the mechanics are already altered before you start applying a lot of your drills. The old days, back in the day, and I usually date myself when I start talking about, when I was back over at Beaverton doing track, basketball, and football, about how minimal our severe injuries were. Like, big time muscle strains and tears, ligament tears. Warm up back in the day was 2 laps in track. In football, it was to the fence and back. And in basketball, you did some layups and your body was ready to go. You can't do that anymore. And it's not because of the nature of the human body needs more, today's athlete, because we're bigger, stronger, faster. It's because we're more dysfunctional across the board. We have more muscle imbalances because of the lack of movement through our entire growing phase of our life. We just don't move, period. So the danger is, if you're working on a car, if you're a mechanic, I like to equate what I do as more of a pit crew for a race car. In track, there's nothing more specific than you want your machine to be as efficient as possible, be able to run at its highest possible level, and not hurt itself. Okay? It's all about efficiency in track, 100%. Obviously, there's some aspects of mind and body and heart to get more out of that body and not let those things stop you, but that's a bonus. That's what coaches get paid for. That's what makes you a great coach, if you can get more out of them internally, in their heart and their head. But their body will break down if it doesn't hold up. Okay, and I know I made some pretty audacious claims on the top of that, but you should never pull a muscle, ever. If your muscles are balanced, you'll fatigue at an even rate, and you'll never create enough torque or stress or pressure to ever injure that tissue or have your brain react in a negative way to have that muscle seize. Now, to get to that point isn't easy. That's the whole point, is you're not just driving your car at a slow rate, you're redlining it. That's the whole point of track, at the top speed. So how do you keep those muscles balanced at the very epitome of your performance, the highest level? Well, you have to start by looking at the body originally. You can't assume that the muscles are balanced when you first get them. It used to be, back in my day, and now I can say that, the biggest discrepancy that most coaches dealt with were growth spurts. Your typical Osgood slaughters, maybe some heel bruising, maybe a little bit of lower back, some hamstring tightness. But stress fractures didn't exist, and they weren't as rampant as they are now. Patella tendonitis, Achilles issues, lower back, groin, shin splints. It all became shin splints because the surface is too hard. We're all of a sudden so weak that we can't run on a hard surface. That's crap. It's the body itself and the way it's loading into its joints aren't balanced anymore. We're not even. So if we don't approach our athletes right out of the gate that they're already broken, and the initial phase of my training needs to be reestablishing some neuromuscular pathways and some relationship between antagonistic muscles, getting the muscle a little bit balanced before I get into all these really cool performance techniques, you're just going to make it worse. And the number one goal here, if I said you're not going to have any of your top end athletes in the first third of your season, but if I can guarantee you 100% of your athletes in the last third of your season, everyone would be signing up and buying some of that, especially in this sport, because it's all about peaking at the right time. It's all about being able to max out your performance when it counts. So as we approach that, we have to shift our focus. If we really care, we have to shift our focus. And warm-ups and cool-downs aren't just kind of a nagging thing that coaches have to deal with until they get to what they perceive as the real guts of their practice with their drills. Right now, because of the population, because of the position of their bodies, the weakness, the imbalances, training that human body to move efficiently is now the most important component of your training before you get into the technique, before you get into drills that increase speed, that increase endurance. If you have an imbalance between opposing muscle groups and you go and you do your sport-specific endurance training, you're going to increase the discrepancy in those muscular patterns, in those muscular groups, which is going to put more stress on the connective tissue, tendons. It's going to create different load-bearing angles. Our bones are built to get stronger with pressure. That's science. All this is fact. How our bones get hard when we're younger is by having pressure put on them equally throughout the entire bone. Now, why do they weaken? Why do we develop a stress fracture all of a sudden? Is it really that calcium doesn't exist? We have to do all these supplements? Or is it that when our bodies, if you look at the average teenager today from the side, and you look at their posture, and it's not just poor posture because they don't care, and they don't have grandma poking them in the back saying sit up straight, it's that they're structurally weak. So now when you're out there doing load-bearing exercises and bounding and plyometrics and ballistic movements, and their joints aren't stacked over the top of each other, they're going to put too much pressure on one side of the bone, and it's going to deteriorate instead of build density. Because our bones are designed to absorb our body weight evenly. That's how they get stronger. So we have to look at it from a different angle now. We have to analyze how many miles can I put on these kids? You know, and I've talked to a lot of coaches in a lot of different fields. Okay, football coaches, squat and power clean. They start shaking a little bit if you start to say that that's not as good for today's kid anymore. Oh, I got to do the big three or we're not going to be competitive. Start to talk to some distance coaches, and I start talking about miles, and they start looking at me like, you know, I'm someone that they should be talking to because I don't understand the sport. Okay? Miles won't do you any good if the way that body runs those miles is damaging to the muscular system. So there has to be a way to train those muscles to perform at a high level to allow those miles to be beneficial. You got to spend time in your warm-ups and your cool-downs. Maybe you don't even call them that anymore so that they have real weight. I coach over at Southridge. We've redesigned the entire program over there in the last 2 years. Every coach on staff has to be present during the warm-up and walk around and adjust and keep the kids focused. It's not a time to socialize. It's the most important part of the entire day to prepare those bodies for the movements we're about to do. We just completed a season with 0 ligament tears, 0 sprains, 0 concussions. We didn't have any. We had 1 contact related where a guy's shoulder got knocked out when he got tackled and ran into the ground, and that was it. Okay? Still doesn't always translate to winning. We didn't win the whole thing, so I'd like to be able to boast that, but we didn't get that done. Talent still has something to do with it. As us coaches, it's really good to be a good coach, great talent. But the mindset has to change, and it has to change because of who's walking through the door, not because our techniques and drills aren't efficient. Okay? So when we're looking at a lot of the aspects of how the body's efficient, period. We talk about nutrition, hydration. You guys are already fighting an uphill battle in those 2 areas. I mean, the muscles that you're dealing with are weak. They can't sustain, they're not resilient, they're dehydrated. They think that drinking a power drink after a workout is hydration, you know, not drinking water all the time like you're supposed to. Nutrition, you're already fighting. We don't have enough time to do one of those 2 aspects, but they play a big part. But the other one's movement. We have to move the human body in certain directions for those muscles to maintain their relationship. Even the coordination to be able to move. Form follows function. You can't adjust someone's form unless they have the function to perform it correctly. And unfortunately, these kids don't. So you have to invest some time into building that up. If the exercise or drill that you do as part of your training can hold and your body can replicate that, and not when it's tired. I mean, one of my favorite visuals, you know, is to watch a runner at the beginning of the marathon and watch a runner at the end of the marathon. Their mechanics, especially recreationally, aren't the same. Their body has recruited a different way to continue to move forward. Okay? And not necessarily the way that the human body is designed. It's got to pull the joints. How many people have seen people run with their leg going in a circular motion. I call it the egg beater gait. Our knees aren't designed to go in a rotation like that. But we recruit a way to do that to keep moving forward. And if we're young enough, our tissues can take that abuse for a while. But it's not efficient. You get more out of taking that person, put them on their side, training their bodies in open range movements without any pressure on their feet and not letting them run at all season and have them run at the end, than try to have them run with that dysfunctional gait pattern and hope that their tissue survives the process. Whether they're light enough and strong enough to survive that movement. Okay? So when we look at all the different, there's a strength and balance. Think of all the techniques you guys are learning. I want to improve the ability for my brain to fire a muscle, for the muscle to be more efficient and propel my body, whether it's in a jump, sprint, kick at the end of a distance run, power and strength. You got to make sure that the muscles are even that are associated with certain joints. My bicep and tricep have a specific relationship with each other. And if you break that, it's going to put my elbow into a compromised position. The other thing that most people don't talk about is endurance imbalances. You know, that's where you get the strains. You don't get the tears, you get the strains and the itises. And there's so many things now that can cure those things or hide those things so you don't feel them, or it changes where the inflammation happens. But it doesn't address the mechanics that slowly wear and tear on that connective tissue, on that tendon. Because if I'm running and I start fatiguing unevenly, my body will recruit a way to keep moving. If I care at all, if I'm a good athlete, if I have a little heart, if I have a coach that's riding my ass the whole time, I'm going to keep running, but maybe not correctly. And now you're going to start to diminish your results. You're going to start to become injury prone. I mean, I've had football players in the past, football player at this school about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, who quit track because he didn't want to get hurt. He was a football player. And I looked at him like a golden retriever going, you're going to quit track because you don't want to get hurt. Because he had such a intense training regimen that when he would run track at full speed, he would always pull or tear something. And that's 100% about imbalance. It's not a black cloud. It's not bad luck. And until we as coaches and trainers start exploring different ways to attract that and take accountability, it's not our fault they're broken when they get to it. But if we ignore that fact, it is our fault. If we do one-dimensional movements and training that's specific to the event and not address the total mechanics of the human body, it is our fault. Our trainers at my gym, if anyone comes to me and says, oh, Jimmy missed this, or this is a little tweak, my trainers don't sleep at night. Because we have to analyze what we did to create that problem. Or if we did anything to make that imbalance worse. So these exercises that we're going to go through, I'm going to spend the rest of the time going over the exercises so we can kind of break it down. Because I want you guys to have something to go play with. And I can sit here on a soapbox and preach lack of balance in training and today's population all we want. But I want you to have something to go use so we give us feedback on how we can make it more efficient. Because in a perfect world, people need to move 3 to 5 hours a day. It's how our bodies are designed. That's why how many people are loving sitting on these things for hours at a time? Okay? Our bodies aren't designed to be stationary. Our mechanics, our blood flow, everything's predicated on plumbing. Everything's predicated on alignment, and our muscles control that 100%, and our muscles are dependent on movement. So, what I've done is I've designed 3 series of exercises. Tried to take into account the kid, because I know attention span, if all of our athletes did everything we said, our lives would be a lot easier too, so you got to take that into account. I have to take account how much time you guys have with the kids, what the ratio is of how many kids you might have. Track warm-ups are huge. And it's usually a very social environment. I love track for that reason as well, even though I took it very seriously with my event. The problem is it's not like we can make it less fun, but we're going to have to take it a little more serious. Or we just spend it during our drills. So it's broken down into 3 different phases. There's an activation phase, which means just introducing the ability for your tools to work correctly. Correcting some of the fundamental postural issues that happen with today's athletes. Okay? The second set is called the integration phase. And this is all based on the system of our adapt progressions. How we train, we analyze the function of the body, we introduce the function, we introduce the performance, and then we assess recovery. So that's what I've applied to this. So the second stage is the integration phase. And that phase is now we're going to introduce some performance to that efficiency. Just because you're efficient doesn't mean you're a good athlete. And when you first learn to walk, you can't run a marathon. When you first learn to walk, you can't sprint very well. There's coordination, proprioception, all these other aspects of performance that we have to address. But you can't sacrifice function trying to build it. For example, there's one exercise in there, lunge walking 100 yards. If you can't lunge walk 100 yards with your hands behind your head, you are not efficient enough to run 2 miles. You're not. You're not efficient enough to sprint. Effectively how the body's designed. You can still get it done, but I guarantee if you took an average high school team and you had them slow down, which good luck with that, how many coaches you have, that's a whole different story. And you literally had them lunge walk with their torso perpendicular to the ground, hands behind their head so they're not swinging and counterbalancing with their arms, getting their knee within 1 inch to 2 inches of the floor, and not having to blink side to side to transition their body weight through the top of that femur rotation, you're set. And I guarantee you have very few people that can get all the way down 100 yards and look efficient doing it. But those are the building blocks for all the things you're going to be doing. Think of triple jumping, long jumping, all the impact stuff, throwing where you're recruiting all your muscles with one component, and you can't sustain your own body weight for 100 yards with full range of motion in each hip. That has to be a starting point. That has to be a barometer. Otherwise, you are guaranteed to have issues later. Okay? And we all know that that's the real key at the end is attrition. If you had all your best guys at the end performing at their best, you're going to be in the dance most of the time. Okay? It's about attrition. And then the last one is, how do we handle fatigue? When we do have an event or we do have a meet and our bodies tear down, what do the kids do when they're done with you guys? I guarantee you they're not working out, they're not moving, what are they doing? They're sitting. Doing what? Playing video games. So if I lifted weights and I tore my muscle up and I did some amazing ballistic work where I got that muscle to tear down all the way to complete fatigue, and then I went home and I rested it like this, how's that muscle going to heal? Short, in the wrong relationship between its integrities, it's going to fatigue, it's going to tighten up. So you're battling, you've got an uphill battle either way. The good thing that you have going for you, especially if you're dealing with a younger athlete, is you have tissue that's very resilient. So they respond incredibly fast, both negatively and positively. So if you're giving them the right type of movements, they should respond in a positive way, and you'll see changes where all of a sudden all your athletes start moving the same way. They start looking that fluid, unlaboring movement where they're not recruiting a lot of momentum. All of a sudden you've been trying to get this guy to have his arms calm, and they can be calm because his hips are strong enough to move them, so he doesn't have to recruit his arms to keep himself upright. Because that's what is actually happening with today's athletes. They're so dysfunctional. Okay? So I have two of my trainers here that are so excited to go through this.
Good job, guys.
So come on up here. So these are just things to get things started. We have a whole program that's designed to checklist any of your workouts. Because the other thing is you have to assume that this is the only time your athlete's going to move that day. If you were working with someone and you knew that was the only meal they were going to have that day, that was the only one, you wouldn't just give them protein. You know that would be detrimental to them. So we have a deal, and I put some of the stuff on this outline for you. We have a minimum of 8 directions of movement in all of our workouts. So instead of doing muscle groups, we have directional movement of our joints. They're going to demonstrate for us a horizontal push. Go ahead and demonstrate the action. Horizontal push is that plane of movement. Doesn't matter if they're on their back or whatever. This pushing away from your body in the horizontal plane of your upper body. Obviously, vertical push is pushing over your head or in line with the midline of the spine. And then pull is the exact opposite, where the resistance when you're pulling your arms closer. So you're using the muscles in the back, using muscles in the front. And we usually don't, evenly. Crawling and doing all that stuff, climbing fences. It's really funny, we have a 9-year-old who's out climbing a tree, which we know is great, but I do speeches about this all the time, and we're still like, oh, maybe you should go so high, and we want to go stop. It's like, we're contributing to the same thing that I give talks on all the time. Because kids start doing that stuff. But you need to within your workouts. How are you going to get a push and a pull during a track workout? How many track athletes are going to bear crawl on the track? On a football field. Not a lot. How many coaches are going to make them do it correctly? Not a lot. So we've come up with different ways to supplement that movement. That's why we call them supplements. So you're still training in that angle. So those are 4 upper body directions. Then the lower body is broken into simple hip movements. Flexion. Bring your right knee up to a spark walk for me. That's when we get the most of. We do get a lot of flexion, even though a lot of people can't lift their leg from their hip. They usually adduct, or they circumduct, or they use their lower leg, which creates the shin splints. Okay? There's extension, which we lack because we're doing what we're doing right now. And this, I call it the casting effect. We sit so much that a lot of these muscles lose their ability to get into extension. And in running, it's everything. It's toe off. Truly getting toe off and not being manufactured in your back. People, your back should be sore to run. Your back should be long for the ride. Your shoulders and neck should never be sore from running, unless you're running on your hands. That shows that your body's compensating for something, or a lack of either range or strength. Okay? And then we have adduction and abduction. The ability for the leg to move laterally. From in the hip, in the socket. We lose that function. We sit so much. We train so much in a flexed position. Even a lot of our speed and quickness drills are in a flexed position. We don't get that hip extension. All the top pro basketball players that I've trained, and they'll see me kind of the tail end of their careers athletically because they've had chronic injuries that have made them come see a guy like me. They lose the ability to do a lunge. They can't do a static lunge. They have no ability to get hip extension. But they're so athletic and they're so strong, they've learned how to do it from the knee down. That's where all these issues, shin splints, plantar fasciitis, where did all this come from? That's because the bottom of the foot is having to do too much. Your feet should be along for the ride. They should just be adjusting for the surface of the ground. Your calves are not designed to propel you forward. Best jumpers in the world don't have calves. Okay? You look around, they don't have these big Popeye calves to jump because you jump by generating the power in your hip. And your opposing calf needs to be strong enough and healthy enough to support the power generated by this hip. So when I drive this leg, these muscles should support the power I've created. But have you trained them in that way? Another best example is the old sitting calf machine. Okay? So I'm sitting down, so my hips are flexed, I have weight over the top of my knees, and I'm doing this. Worst conceptual piece of equipment in the history of human performance. When do your calves fire when you walk? Are your hips extended or flexed? Extended. So the alignment of the bones, the position of the muscles, is designed on toe off in this position. Even if I'm jumping, my hips are going into extension as I'm using my calves. So you're training a muscle in a way that the body's not even designed to use them. But they look bigger. It's an easy way to get a lot of weight on there. Whoa, look at that blood flow, and I'm getting that sucker pumped up. Well, bodybuilding and powerlifting has created that training hangover that we're still kind of locked into. And there's nothing wrong with powerlifting. I mean, that's a way to test strength. The problem is a lot of the techniques used to test strength are now being used to develop strength, and they aren't in accordance with the rules and laws of how the human body works, especially track. Track is the epitome of human function. You're testing the body's ability to perform at its highest level. You can't do anything that diminishes that function. Any technique, any exercise that goes against the efficiency of how your joints move is counterproductive to track. Absolutely. So these are the exercises I've kind of put together to be able to do that. We also use what we call reset exercises. So when we do a performance movement, if I'm out lifting weights and my body's fatiguing, how do I reestablish the ideal position in my joints? Or I just stay fatigued? There's a thing I call muscular tenacity. Some of us, because we all have different genetics, and our muscles respond differently to demand, but our muscles can hold a position. I gotta make sure it releases itself. Simple as walking backwards as part of your interval training. It will reset certain aspects of muscular relationships in your hip from training those simple ideas. And then integration. We can't isolate muscle groups and train them, then expect them to be coordinated on the track or the field of the court. Can't expect that. If the human body is moving athletically all day long, you could do an hour of very specific sport-related techniques, and the body would respond. That's where all these cool techniques came from 20, 30, 40 years ago. but the human body was correct and working correctly and moving correctly. So all you had to do is some real specific techniques, and you got these huge gains. Okay? You know, it's the same age thing. It's like, how many people here, you know, knew what an ACL was in high school? It didn't exist. Well, you're just said how old you are. Yeah. But people didn't hurt themselves moving. They didn't jump incorrectly. They didn't land incorrectly. You might have had a couple contact-related injuries, but we have so much. But the thing is, the medical community is you know, moving at such a fast pace to catch up with it. Our techniques are more improved. The drugs we can take are more improved. The bracing, all that stuff to try to keep us together, rather than analyzing why are they happening all the time. Who the hell is this coming from? Okay. So as I go through these exercises, you'll notice that the early stages, there's not a lot of performance. You're really guaranteeing that the body's moving correctly. But you got to invest a little bit of time and effort. I mean, if you expect a couple of your captains to run 50, 60 people through this and get anything out of it, you're kidding yourself. And we all know that. You have to look at these things as important. So I strongly suggest a lot of position coaches use this as part of their technique. So right before they do their drills, do this sequence, do your drill, do this sequence. And that way because if they're not doing your technique correctly, you adjust. You do correctly. That's what good coaches do. Got to have the same emphasis when it comes to preparing the body. And we call it pre and post rather than warm up and cool down, because warm up and cool down is kind of weak. I mean, it just doesn't have any power to it. We're trying to change that culture, but it's a long talk about uphill battle. A lot of open chain movements where there's no fixed component where your foot's not attached to something. Okay, so because otherwise the body will cheat. Running, you can't just run to get better at running. Little babies didn't, you know, use walking to learn how to walk. They crawled to build all the coordinated movements of the muscular structure to be able to do it. And they learned the event of walking. Okay, so we're going to get started. These guys are really excited about it. So, lower body routines, they're broken down into 3 different aspects: activation, integration, and performance. So the first one, we're going to do spread foot elbow curls. So getting your feet as wide as they can. And something else, guys, we're going to get more information from everyone. This will all be online. So we'll have a video of this that you'll be able to reference. And glossary of exercises and everything else will be online within 2 weeks of after this that you guys can go back and reference on our website. So, because I really like people to listen and not worry about having to write everything down. If you write stuff down to learn, don't let me stop you. But that's why I did it in that way, so you didn't have to worry about writing every single thing down. So the first thing is the body's position. These adductors are some of the worst compensating muscles in the body. I mean, lower back, upper trap, and adductors kind of make up for everything. The overbearing mother trying to protect your legs. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the feet out wide, feet straight ahead, which is going to hurt some people. So they can only go as far out as they can. If this person's feeling pain in their knee and their ankle, what's that tell you? That means the hip can't move out there. That means the torque and pressure is being translated into the knee and the ankle to manufacture this position. You'll have people who cramp just getting into this position. And not because they didn't drink pickle juice or whatever the latest craze is for cramps. It's a demonstration of imbalance between muscular structures and the inability for the hip to get into this position. So you squeeze your butt and tighten your thighs. You say that as socially acceptable as you want to, depending on the age group you're working with. Obviously, we're right on the borderline with these 2 guys. And you're going to do elbow curls. Okay? Now, why would we think that's important? Okay, one of the most important aspects of what we lose in the upper body is the relationship in our shoulders. Because we're in this position all the time. So our shoulder gets rounded forward, our scaps lose the ability to adduct. So when you're talking about running form, they'll do it in their back rather than using their shoulder blades to actually adduct, because they can't. They're so tight and weak from being in this position all the time. And if they'll do 20 of these, oh, I'm tired, I'm burning. It's like, you're kidding me. This is your body, these are arms. This should not be difficult. And the other cool thing about how I've designed this is as they do these, and I'm going to keep going because I'm going to work a little hard today, it should get easier. So this could be a workout for some of your kids right out of the gate, not just a pre and a post. This might be the workout. And if it is, it should adjust you as a coach saying, man, I better back off on some of my demand on my load-bearing stuff. But they're young enough, this will become easy, and the next set of sequences will be hard, and then those set of sequences will be used as the warm-up and cool down. Okay? All right, next position. So we adduction, abduction in terms of introducing the angle to hip. Now we're going to go into static lunge, hold pullover. So turn profile, guys. There you go. Nope, not too low. Don't be show off. Stand up higher, 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 higher. Lock them out. Lock out both knees. Now just bend both. All you want to feel is a stretch in the front of that hip. Kids are gonna fall. They're gonna do everything, and they're gonna be pretending like they're on some balance board because of the imbalances you're gonna notice side to side. And if you're trying to run in a straight line, this function's kind of important. The ability for one hip to flex and the other hip to extend and support your own body weight. So what we're doing is they're going to be in this position, and then they're going to do a pullover. Because same thing, these muscles get locked. They do not move during the normal course of the day of an athlete, student athlete especially. Okay? So what we're also doing is we're teaching the hips and the upper body to move independently. Because what happens when the hips get weak and tired, when I go to run, I start recruiting muscles in my upper back to help. That's why you'll see someone like pin their elbow or overly swing to counterbalance. It's because they're recruiting momentum in their upper body to counterbalance weakness in their lower body. So this is a way to teach. Go ahead and switch legs, guys. To introduce that function. The other cool thing is, depending on the age group, their bodies aren't too far away from doing that. Some of our bodies have 30, 40 years away from doing this correctly. They might have 5, 6, 7 years because they were still young enough when their bodies move correctly, they'll snap back fast and remember this movement. They don't have years of scar tissue and 7 surgeries like I do and everything else where I have to do, 40 minutes of something just to do these. There's a reason these guys are demonstrating and not me to be able to do that. Okay? Now we're going to go into spread foot glides. So we've done it statically, introduced the angle, the range of motion, and the movement. Now we're going to articulate. Now we're going to transition from one position to another. So scoot over, you use the bench for me, Tyler. You're welcome.
On top of it?
No, just hands.
On top of it.
There's some people that won't be able to put their hands on the floor. Because the goal with this is to have a flat back, which is going to be difficult. Okay? And you want to see, and I use a lot of analogies, but I want to pretend my butt doesn't, if it's a camera, it's always pointing straight back. You shouldn't be twisting. If you're twisting, you're not actually articulating on the top of your femurs. You're using your knees, your ankles, maybe your spine to compensate for this motion. This is going to be difficult. A lot of athletes lose the ability to be in their hips, really rotate their hips. So they're going side to side, weight staying on the inside of your feet. Okay? And when you notice the body's ability to go laterally, it improves their ability to go straight ahead. It sounds funny, but what it does is it creates a balance on either side of your leg that allows your femur and thigh bone to sit in the proper position to get that knee. Everyone says, hey, high knee drive, get up on your toes, all these things. What if their femur is so tight that it's externally rotated all the time? You can't do it. And when they try to, they use their back or they use their ankles. Anytime you compensate, that's when you're going to have problems. Because the body's not designed to sustain that. The tissues will break down instead of being reinforced. If you use your body in the way it's intended, everything gets stronger. If I put more force on my muscles get stronger. If I put too much force on my muscles and only in one way, then it tears down. So the goal is to always build and not tear down. Relax. All right, stork step-ups. Here's another one, okay? Since you got the easy one there, go ahead and do this. You're going to stand there and just do a stork, static stork. Okay, so she's going to put her foot flat. Hold on. Here's another thing. Her foot's going to be flat on the ground. I do not want her to recruit her calf. That doesn't mean that I've worked with a lot of coaches when they work with me, and they'll go, oh, why are you telling them to be flat-footed? You don't want to be flat-footed. I go, no, I'm training the mechanics of her hip in this movement. I'm not training and improving the mechanics of her calf. The calf comes in other things that we'll do with the walking lunge and everything else, but I really want to isolate her ability to use the muscles high in that hip first. Okay? Little babies, when they're on their back before they walk, they don't have any pressure on their feet. They're just doing open chain movements all the time, building the integrity of the movements of the core muscles of your hip and spine. So, in the perfect world, she'd have her hands behind her head so she wouldn't recruit momentum. She's going to drive her leg into the bench like she's pushing to the clutch. Another analogy wasted on today's youth because they don't know what a clutch is. She's going to push straight down into the bench and drive up and drive the other knee up into a 90-degree angle and then back down, all on the same leg. Good. Now you saw a little bounce in the beginning because she's also a distance runner. So her weakness, she knows, is really high here and really high here that we're working on and building. But she's so strong for her weight that she can get away with not being equal on all those muscles. But she's running ultra now too, so we're gonna catch up with her. Okay, go ahead and do that for them on each side. If you can't do that, you start on this position. If someone's too heavy, too weak, too structurally imbalanced. This is also an exercise to do when someone's coming off an injury, after they pull a muscle and they treat the muscle. You can't jump right back into performance movements. These will retrain the muscles back from that. So they're used in the beginning of the season, what I call the preseason, and they're also used as a first step back from an injury. So that when they go to run full speed again, they're balanced and they're not going to hurt something else. Because most times they don't hurt the same muscle again, or the same injury or same joint. They hurt how their body cheats to keep pressure off the previous injury. Okay? Same thing. It says for 30 seconds. I have two different times on there. So if you're a coach and you're controlling it yourself, you can do it with a stopwatch and a whistle. If you're having everyone do it together, or you can have the trainer or a captain do it themselves. And they can just count. So that's why I put both of them on there. Just purely from a coaching perspective, if you're in control of it, it's easier to do by time instead of having to count. You're not going to trust that they're going to do them all. Some people are going to do more or less. So time's easier if you're controlling it as a coach. Okay? Now, here's one that's going to be tough. Because this isn't the most socially acceptable position to train, but you need to get the length. How many people do the heel walking and toe walking in track that you've seen? Do all those type of things, right? The mechanics of increasing the tissue length and resiliency is great. Training the brain, the neuromuscular connection to walk that way isn't so good. You've got to incorporate other aspects because those are supportive muscles. So what we're doing in a way to load their upper and lower body, you go to the wall, you come this way, you go toward me, you go away, and you're going to walk your hands out as far as you can. It's great. I mean, the plank is one of the most popular exercise these days. Everything goes in. And they keep their legs locked, so there shouldn't be any bend in their knees, and they're going to walk up on their toes as high as they can, their fingertips, and walk back out. You're going to get proper lengthening in all the connective tissue in the back of your legs. But the important thing is you're going to establish the relationship between the calf and the rest of the body. It's a support muscle. It's designed to go with other movements. Okay? It's going to be hard. That's one that I debated. Another way to do it, you can do leg lifts and stuff like that. When it really comes down to it, efficiency, the crawling mechanism, you can't beat. Crawling in any form is nature's personal trainer. Bear crawling, baby crawling, doing inchworms. It evens all the muscles in your body. Okay? And then the last one is static lunges. Put your hands behind your head. Go profile again for me. And now the goal is to go 90 degrees. 90 in the front, 90 in the back. Knee doesn't go past the toe. Straight down, straight up. Keeping those hands behind the head is important. Because one, it's going to reinforce the adduction of the shoulder blades. And two, the inability to counterbalance with your upper body. Okay, go ahead and do your leg a couple times. And that says up to 30 times. Yeah, go ahead.
How much do you emphasize the position in those lunges?
The position on this?
Hip position.
A lot.
Rotated.
Yep.
Do you have to cue that, and how do you cue it?
You do it by the position. Now, when we do the walking lunge, it's going to be a little different because some people won't be able to do this. So when they first do it, they're going to be posterior. They're not going to get their glute to go through extension. And what happens is they go down, it's like, oh, this is killing my knee. Because their hip won't go into extension, so all the force goes forward into the cell tendon. So those people, you have to go to where they can tolerate and continue to do it. We have other exercise programs, like the durability program and everything, for people that are even more complicated than these exercises can handle. Because the cool thing is most kids, if they do this sequence, their bodies will figure it out and start to stretch and lengthen. But if you're going to emphasize it, like if one of these trainers working with somebody, you say, okay, I really want you to try to squeeze your glute. And they might not be able to find it. They're going to try to squeeze and they're not going to know what you, very casually say, go ahead and put your hand on your butt and try to get that glute to fire so that this hip is coming forward. But most people won't.
It seems easier to emphasize the abdominal section rather than the glute.
What's that?
Isn't it easier to have them flex the abdominal?
No, because then you're not changing the angle of the femur. Because what the abs and back can do, because if you're flexing your abdominals, you're initiating the motion of the hip from the spine. And our bodies aren't designed to do that. Our spine is a support mechanism of our hips, not the other way around.
If you rotate the hips up?
But think about, so your muscles on your spine are attached to your pelvis. Okay? We're trying to get the function of the femur into extension, not just the position of the pelvis. Because you're really working on the relationship between these two bone structures. And the problem is a lot of people can falsely create the proper form by using this to change the pelvic angle, but not changing the actual angle of the femur in relationship to the pelvis. So when they run, they might be able to hold themselves like you like it, but they haven't increased the function of the actual bone, the mechanism of the femur into the socket. And that's where a lot of training now has gotten off course, because it's easier they think neutralizing from the spine, because it's a lot easier way to contract consciously, but it's backwards on how our bodies are designed. I mean, I started a chiropractic seminar with 200 sports chiropractors in front of me, and I said, strong abs don't make a strong back. And I almost had half the people leave the room. And I go, your abs and your back are supportive muscles just like your calves. Little babies can't do sit-ups. They don't have strong abs, but the integrity of how your ankle, knee, and hip, and your spine in relation to your pelvis is all even. Now you're strong, your integrity is strong. And so you actually don't want them to contract their abdominal muscles first. They should fire in support. They shouldn't fire to brace and create the anchor point for movement, which is kind of a shift a lot of times. Okay, so that sequence we use as a pre and post, or as a workout. If someone's struggling in that, and we'll have instructions and schedules on the internet, they might have to go through that 3 or 4 times and call that a workout, do a light jog in between, and they're roasted. Because if they're that weak in one area of their body, they shouldn't go out and try to perform, because all they're going to do is strengthen the other parts of their body that are already strong. So it's yeah.
I just was curious on the activation, would you use weight for any of this if you wanted, like some of that motion?
I wouldn't know, because I would use the next sequence as the demand. This is a great reminder. How many people here, if you were on a car ride for 6 hours, won't get out of your car and sprint? Why wouldn't you? Because your muscles aren't ready to sprint. These are very specific sequences to get your body ready to move. So they aren't great for performance. If you want to add performance, then the next set of sequences is what it's designed to do. Could you add weight to this if you got really good at it? Sure. As long as you can guarantee they can do the full reps and sets without those weights, and you don't hold the weights in a way that helps you create more momentum. Because efficiency is everything. Okay, the integration sequence. Okay, standing rotational stork walks. Okay, put your hands behind your head, pull those elbows back, externally rotate the right leg, bring it up as high as you can, rotate it around and set it back down in place. If you're going to hear popping, cracking, you feel like there's marbles in your hips, maybe more on one side than another. But it's the same thing, we want to reintroduce the ability to rotate that head. But believe it or not, this is a dynamic movement. If they can't do that first sequence, you shouldn't jump right into this. And that sounds ridiculous because this doesn't look that hard. But there's more ways to cheat doing this than there are doing the other elementary exercises or in the activation. So if they can handle those moves, you know that they're going to start to do this correctly. But I guarantee you, they're going to start leaning, they're going to start moving their foot, they're going to let their hands come out to their ears so they can move their hands to cheat. And remember, if we're going to spend all that time working on our form and track, we got to spend all that time building the function to support that form. Okay? All right. And then lunge walk. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start here, and you guys start there, and you come this way and do that. So hands behind your head, elbows back. You can also go into an overhead extension for me. That's a more advanced way to do it as well. So now you want to do it without pausing, and you're just rocking over that front hip, not touching or bouncing off the bottom leg. You want to prevent shin splints? Here you go. These cause shin splints, you know they have a real weakness, and they will. Because what they're going to do is they're going to work so hard with the lower leg to support that movement that they have no hip integrity. But if you look at that first set of sequences, that set of sequences is designed to build the ability to do this correctly. That's why they're in a progression. You don't jump right into this. Okay? And it also says 100 yards. Okay? You should be able to do this 100 yards in track. I mean, 100 is the shortest amount you do anything. In any kind of running movement. You should have the integrity to do that. Okay, another one, roller coasters. Go profile again. Start in a downward dog position. You're going to drop your chest down, come all the way through. Okay, it's still pretty doable on an outside because you're not laying on the ground. But how many people can support their own body weight doing this mechanism? or doing this movement.
Do you go backwards through it, or do you?
That's a more advanced version. That creates more resistance on the way back. This is building the function, but I'll just say yes to every question you ask, because we can do this where your feet are elevated on the bench. You can do this where your hands are on both balls. You
I
can,
was used to doing it both
with the
ways.
dive bomb or with the reverse.
Right.
But the real key to this is we want full extension. Now, if they can handle this easy, go ahead and throw that back one into reverse. You know what I'm saying? Okay? And then the last one that everyone was really excited to see is the range of motion jump squats. Okay, you don't have to have your hands behind your head on this one, but you're going to go down into a squat position. You can use momentum a little bit, and you're going to jump as high as you can, bring your knees to your chest, and then you're going to land with your butt going as low as to your ankles as you can. Go ahead and do a couple, guys. And you should be able to hear their feet, right? You go as high as you can. Do a couple, good. Now, and the goal is they bring their knees as high as they can. I mean, this is an old drill that sprinters used to do all the time before they got into blocks. But a lot of people won't be able to handle. This is another one to build load-bearing endurance, structural capacity to prevent the stress fractures and everything else. But you wouldn't start out with these. If they can't do the static lunges in the first sequence, you'd never get to this movement. That's the whole idea, is you're rebuilding the efficiency of the human body from a position that they can handle it, so they don't recruit a bunch of momentum or compensated movement patterns to create unnecessary stress on their joints or their pressure. Okay? The recovery routines will be on there, more like stretches that we'll go over, and they'll all be online and demonstrated for you, because I know we got a late start because of the last talk, so I'm running out of time to be able to go through all those exercises. I'm going to hang out a little bit after this to go through it. But here's the idea. Those first set of exercises, introduction to function, okay? Developing the function of these exercises. Using these exercises as a warm-up and cool-down for your performance phase when you're in the latter part of your track season. They should be able to do these easy, and as you go through your track season, it should be more and more event-specific training and less of these type of movements, because the body will assimilate and get stronger to be able to do it. But in the beginning, to ensure that your body's doing it efficiently, that's what these exercises are designed to do. And it's just one way. And like I said, there's variations to all of these things. But if you're a mechanic and you were in charge of someone's race car, you would put that car through a full diagnostic before you did any kind of test runs. And unfortunately, it's unrealistic to take a functional assessment, through 60 to 100 people. But if you do these exercises, the diagnostic will show itself. It's like, look, they can't support their own body weight. Wow, when their right leg's back, they can do it. When their left leg's back, they can't. Well, if they're a distance runner, they're going to be in trouble. And not just injury, it's going to diminish their performance because they're not balanced. Their energy level will drop. Their fatigue imbalance will create all sorts of performance issues. So this is just one way or a test to start to introduce functional movement. And I hate that word functional because that sounds too alternative. It's movement, it's correct, it's efficient. It's not functional, it's not alternative, it's not, this weird mystical deal. It's either functional or dysfunctional. And if you train dysfunctionally, you're going to create problems and vulnerabilities. So, like I said, I'll hang out in the back a little bit. If you guys have any more questions. My job and goal with the DAP program is to build usable supplements and systems for coaches to use for their kids. Because like I said, in the perfect world, you'd be training for 3 or 5 hours. That's not going to happen. So if we can build programs that are more useful for what you're looking for, that's when we want to get that impact from you guys. Any questions real quick before we head out into the back? What's it? Yeah?
Doing the lunge walks is good for shin splits?
It prevents. Yeah. If you can do lunge walks, if you can lunge walk 100 yards with legitimate form, you're not going to develop shin splints. If they have shin splints, you got to start with the first exercise to where they can get through all those exercises without feeling their shins. Then you progress to the next set of exercises. That's why it's designed as a progression. Because if you feel any pain anywhere, you don't mask it. Don't take pills, don't hide it, don't change your elevation in your feet with orthotics or bands around your... It's your check engine light in your car going off saying something is wrong. Your mechanics and your alignment are off. Your muscular balance is off. Take responsibility for trying to correct that, not just mask it, tape it up, and hope for the best when you get to the performance side. All right, thanks guys, really appreciate it.